What do we want?
Equal rights!
When do we want them?
Now!
What do we want?
Equal rights!
When do we want them?
Now!
What do we want?
Equal rights!
When do we want them?
Now!
What do we want? When do we want them?
The Friday session, Socialism 2009 in San Francisco. Woo! In case you didn't realize by the chants, this panel is Prop 8 is going down. Woo! And the other part was winning marriage equality in California, but I would say, we want to go beyond California for sure. So we have an amazing lineup of speakers tonight. It's really an honor. My name's Regina Johnson. I'm an activist here in San Francisco, and it's an honor to chair the meeting tonight. I wanted to get Kevin to come up here and do an announcement really quick. We're going to have translation for folks, so could you come in?
Hello everyone. Si alguien necesita traducción, mi nombre es Kevin y voy a estar en este lado aquí. Y también se necesita traducción mañana o domingo. Puede encontrar compañeros que pueden traducir enfrente, aquí atrás de las puertas. Hay un póster en la pared que dice traducción. Ok, gracias.
Thanks, Kevin. I think that's an excellent showing that the right wing is wrong and the conservative wing in the movement is wrong, that we're building a movement that is inclusive, that actually LGBT people come from all colors, all backgrounds, all stripes. So thanks a lot, Kevin, for doing that tonight. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your time because I could say a million things in introduction, but I would just say the last 8 months have been the most amazing experience as an activist that I've ever had here in San Francisco. It is definitely, the LGBT movement is showing us what a new left means for a new era. So that's about all I'm going to say for now. I don't want to take anyone's fire. I'm just going to introduce some really great folks we have on the panel tonight. We have Zakiya Kabir. Woo! And please stand up, folks, so everyone can see how fabulous you are. She is an activist from San Diego, part of the San Diego Alliance of Marriage Equality. She helped organize the sit-in at the County Administration Building in San Diego where over 70 people sat in on decision day. And I've had the pleasure and honor of working with David Michael Hatton from One Struggle, One Fight here in San Francisco, who I would consider a friend as well as a fellow activist. And he helped organize our civil disobedience we had in San Francisco of 211 people. Shutting down Van Ness Street, which if anyone knows what Van Ness Street here, it is actually the thoroughfare that goes to the Golden Gate Bridge. We shut down that for hours. Great. So over here on my left, I have Lonnie. Lonnie Lopez is from Seattle. And he's a founding member of Queers Alliance Coalition. So give it up. Thanks, Lonnie, for being a part of this. And last but not least at all, we have Sherry Wolf, who's a longtime LGBT activist. Who is the amazing author of this new book that everyone should buy tonight and get Sherry to sign it, Sexuality and Socialism. Okay. So the way that it's going to work is everyone here is going to talk for a little while. We're going to be talking for probably about 50 minutes, and then we'll have time for discussion, questions, and answers and stuff. So first, welcome Zakiya to the microphone.
All right, hello everybody. I have to warn you that this talk has grown and shrunk many times, as I have a lot to say about what's going on in San Diego around this movement. Like it was said, I'm a member of the San Diego Alliance for Marriage Equality, and there are a number of same members throughout the audience here. We formed just after the passage of Prop 8 and the huge November 15th march that brought 25,000 people out into the streets of San Diego. And San Diego is a conservative town, and we actually had the largest march, and we still don't have complete understanding of why that happened, but it did. We don't have a huge, strong left in the way you do here or in New York or Chicago, but large numbers of San Diegan same-sex couples got married in the brief time when it was legal. So I believe that the issue cuts quite close to home for them. Marriage Equality USA and SAME have been at the lead of the struggle for marriage equality in San Diego. Basically, if you're new to LGBT activism and you think door-to-door canvassing is the way to go, you go to MEUSA. And if you think that protest and direct action and visibility are more effective tools for change, you come to a SAME meeting. There's a handful of people that come to both, okay? And it's the situation in San Diego is a little more complicated than that, but not really much. There's also the North County LGBT Coalition. San Diego is a huge county, so there's a great deal of people to the north of us who have their own organizing and a similar structure that we do. And I do want to say, because it's not the case in every town, that we actually work very closely with our local allies in Equality California and MEUSA and HRC. We're able to maintain our political independence, but we're able to work in coalitions with them very well, which I think has been a key to having a really strong movement down there. But SAME is based on the idea that all voices are valuable in this movement, and that the time for letting any organization, no matter how well funded, make decisions that affect us and without our say, that time is over. SAME, of course, is a part of a new wave of activists all across the country that have been able to breathe new life into the gay rights movement in a number of ways. We've moved the front of the movement from the courtroom and back into the streets. Of course, we're always happy when the courts rule in our favor, but by increasing our visibility, we have engaged the general public in a discussion about same-sex marriage. We've shown the world that our rights won't be taken away so easily next time without a fight. In San Diego, another thing that we've done is we've also begun supporting other movements as openly LGBT contingent. We march in solidarity to win the rights for everyone. We've been steadfast in our support for labor and the immigrants' rights movement. I don't know how many people are aware of the boycott of Doug Manchester's Hyatt. Okay, so people are aware. That boycott, because Doug Manchester gave $125,000 to the Yes on 8 campaign. And he also, much to his chagrin now, I'm sure, has horrible working conditions for his hotel employees. So that union has been incredibly powerful between labor and the LGBT community, because it brings attention to both issues. There's a real conversation being happening in San Diego about it. Another positive outcome of the California gay uprising is that people are infused with a bold new confidence, and they're coming out of the closet in greater rates. And they're engaging in conversations that they were too afraid to have before. And I think that doesn't happen with door-to-door canvassing. I think that happens because we're in the streets. People who've never so much as participated in the march are now taking leadership roles within the movement. And a number of those people, joined us on the day that the members of SAME occupied the San Diego County Administration Building, clerk's office, and refused to leave until same-sex couples were issued a marriage license. And actually, half of two of those couples are here today, so give them a hand. They had to put up with a lot of cameras in their faces and had to do a lot of interviews that day, so they deserve the extra credit. Okay. Just quickly about how the sit-in came to be. Sometime in early March, and this was before the National Call to Civil Disobedience came about, our group voted unanimously to participate in a sit-in. The feeling is that we had already had 3 fairly large marches and rallies in San Diego, and if the courts had the audacity to say that it was okay to discriminate, then we needed to do something to directly confront the system. There were sort of 2 forces guiding our actions. There is the one side that said, in order to make this successful and actually safer for the people participating, we needed to be as open and as large as we could be. And then there was the other side that said we needed complete secrecy. Don't talk on the phone, no emails. Shred the documents that you've used. Use a secret code name to refer to this action. And of course, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department will beat the shit out of you. These were sort of the things we were contending with. And some of those concerns were important to have on our mind as we went forward because what we were doing was not necessarily a walk in the park. But at times it did feel like we were actually planning the revolution. But you can see the dilemma of trying to do an action that is actually never spoken about in public. But thankfully, those who were arguing for openness won out in the end because they found out that a group called One Struggle, One Fight was advertising everywhere and letting everyone know that they were participating in civil disobedience. So it allowed our action to come out of the closet as well. Just a bit about the sit-in itself. It was an amazing experience. At our height, there were 70 people in the room, but all day long, people came in and out. Some people sat for an hour or 2. Some people stayed for 5 minutes. The room was packed. People told individual stories that were incredibly personal about why they were there that day. And it was just, it's one of the proudest days I've had as an activist and also one of the more emotional ones. I hope everyone gets a chance to hear a letter from a Birmingham jail while they're actually participating in an act of civil disobedience. Okay. So we didn't negotiate anything with the police in advance. We just cut them out of the they weren't on the listserv.
So you think.
Yeah. But around 4 o'clock, the Sheriff's Department started getting antsy, and they had given us a lot of latitude during the day, and they gave us the dispersal order: you all must leave, or you'll be arrested. And much to our, excitement, 25 people were willing to stay and get arrested, and many of them were people who were not a part of our original group that had planned this, and they were well aware of the consequences. They knew that they could potentially spend 6 days in jail, but they were willing to stand there for their rights. So then, the sheriffs come in and they say, hello, you're all under arrest, stand up, well, we're going to march out of the building, blah, blah, blah. We're going to march you actually to be arrested, but what they actually did was they let us out of the building. It was one of the oddest things that has ever happened to me, to be like surrounded by sheriffs 1 second and then just be outside. Like, what is going on? But we've been told by people inside law enforcement that they actually did intend to arrest us all, and it's my belief that it was our numbers that kept that from happening. This was a radicalizing experience for those who participated. I keep telling this story, but there was one guy who I had written off completely within the movement because he had said that protests didn't matter, and what we need, all this visibility and stuff, that was the civil rights era, we don't need it now. And he was actually in that room leading chants about revolution. So yes, it's true, consciousness can change through struggle. And in the month since the sit-in, SAME hasn't rested. We haven't slowed down a bit. We're still marching and planning vigils and town halls, and there are actually 2 vigils, unfortunately, being planned right now, even though most of us are here, in San Diego, though SAME's not directly a part of them. This is kind of a story that hasn't broken fully yet, but a sailor named August Provost was murdered at the San Diego's Camp Pendleton on Tuesday. He was openly gay outside of the base. There are reports that he was burned. And there are also reports that he had been harassed for being gay by other members of the military in advance of that. So, again, all the details aren't clear. The Navy, of course, is saying nothing about this. But the feeling is that hate crimes happening on federal property because of one's sexual orientation have got to go. So that's just a small overview of what's happening in San Diego, and I feel like we're just at the beginning. The people have spoken. We're going to the ballot in 2010, okay? And for us to be successful, a massive amount of organizing has to happen beyond what we've done so far. We have to build coalitions, not only with other movements, but also with people within the LGBT community who might have different ideas about organizing. But I also think there's space within that campaign, which is going to be, quite a task, that we can fight other battles as well. I know this is not a surprise to those of you in this room, but LGBT people work. They are sent to war. They are losing access to the health care, and they're also the victim of hate crimes, obviously. And it would be really foolish for us to abstain from those movements as well, just because they aren't exclusively LGBT. I was going to leave it there, but then I overheard and kind of stepped into a conversation earlier today where someone was making the argument that, marriage was the wrong goal. Like, this isn't where our movement should be. And, it's unfortunate that the right to marry isn't really about the day that you stand and recite your vows. And many of the rights that opposite-sex couples have protect them and ease them in times of tragedy. These hospital rights, Social Security, health benefits, child custody, those sort of things. And as socialists and as people who believe that everyone should be treated equally and fairly under the law, you must support the fight to repeal Prop 8. Yes. Yes, marriage is a historically bourgeoisie, heterosexist institution. And yes, married people enjoy rights that single people don't have. And yes, eventually we will abolish marriage as we know it for everyone and allow civil unions for everyone. And I understand the desire to have all those things, but to abstain or even worse, be against a movement that is simply demanding the right to enter into a legal contract with another person and a right that they are denied by the state on the basis of their sexual orientation, it's just simply wrong, and we won't have it anymore. That was amazing. Thanks, Zakia. David will be our next speaker. Woo!
So I have to apologize. I got talked into speaking about 15 minutes before this started. So if this is a little scatterbrained, I apologize. but like Regina said, I'm here representing One Struggle, One Fight. And for those of you who don't know about us, we believe in fighting for full equality for LGBT people, for equal protection under the law in all 50 states outside of California, and really, I think, turning this into a global human rights issue. We believe that we have to build bridges with other communities and other struggles. We believe that we have to find connections and look for connections and make connections with other minorities and oppressed people. We believe that direct action and civil disobedience and community mobilization are indispensable and must be employed if we can expect to win or make any progress at all. And so I'd like a show of hands. Who here was arrested with us at Van Ness Grove on May 26th? That, I can honestly say, I think that was maybe the proudest day of my life. When we began organizing, we were hoping for maybe 20 or 30 people to get arrested with us. The Friday before, we thought we could maybe push it and get 40 to 60. And I was shocked when we ran out into that intersection and I looked over to grab somebody from One Struggle, One Fight's hand and looked out and there were 20 or 30 people between me and that person, people I'd never met before, people I'd never seen at a meeting. And I mean, we had to like squish to fit everybody into that intersection. It was amazing. But to me, there were several things that stood out to me that day. One was that the group of people, I mean, there were 211 of us after all, but the group of people that were there was so diverse. There were our straight and cisgendered allies were there in full force and willing to get arrested for us and stand up for our rights. We had people from every religion. We had people from every race, different creeds, different backgrounds, different economic statuses, all there for the same purpose and fighting for the rights of queer people. And that is completely the opposite of how the No on 8 campaign was run, with one image, one very specific image of white, upper middle class gay people presented. And it completely dispels the myth that there is some kind of war between the queer community and between people of color and people of faith. We had Robert Moore is a member of One Struggle, One Fight, and is queer and is a Mormon. And I had my friends from Utah who are Mormons call and say that they had seen pictures of our action and seen Robert arrested in his missionary tag, and how much that meant to them that they have people fighting for inclusion in their church. And one thing I love about One Struggle, One Fight is that I can, as a diehard atheist, sit next to Robert, who's a Mormon, and we can fight for this together. Let's see. Oh boy. So and the other thing that really stuck out to me in that day was, as a trans person, getting arrested was a very different bag for me than it was for all of the cisgendered folks that were arrested that day, and for the trans folks whose paperwork matches their identity. I made the decision that day not to bring my ID with me, because even though the SF Police Department has some infrastructure set up to deal with trans people, I didn't feel comfortable handing that piece of plastic over to the cops and expecting that they would still validate my identity. So I was informed early on, first the cops tried to talk me out of getting arrested, and then I was informed that if I was arrested, I would be kept separately from everyone else. I would be booked separately. I would be taken in a cop car by myself, and I would be arrested last, away from everyone else, which is exactly what happened. And there really aren't words for how completely othering that experience was. And their argument was that as a trans person, if I was to be put in a paddy wagon with a bunch of men, that I would be at risk for rape. And honestly, I felt a hell of a lot more at risk for rape in a cop car by myself with 2 cops than I would have in a paddy wagon with 14 men who stood beside me and who held my hand in that blockade. But more than anything else, the images and the words that are going to stay with me from that day are when I was brought in. They had us kind of in these pens out back at the police station, and they brought me out by myself and led me over to this little like 3x3 makeshift blockade. And instantly Kip Williams, who was supposed to be speaking here tonight, not me, runs up to the side and he yells at the cop who had me, you can't keep him separate because he's trans. And suddenly I had all of the activists I'd been arrested with at the sides of their pens yelling at these cops and standing in solidarity with me and sending words of encouragement over to me the entire time. And I can't begin to, as a trans person and as a queer trans man, I have spent a lot of my life feeling very, very alone. And I felt less alone that day than I ever have. And that's really, that day was momentous for several reasons. For me personally, I've been involved in lots of different queer activism, and before I moved to San Francisco, was involved with much more mainstream organizations like HRC and EQCA, and constantly was having to deal with the transphobia in those organizations. This was the first time organizing in any kind of queer setting that I didn't have to deal with that I didn't have to constantly correct people on my pronouns or ask them not to use the word tranny in reference to me. And so what that day signaled to me, and what One Struggle, One Fight and organizations like SAME signaled to me, is that trans people have a place at the table. We have a place in this movement. Attitudes are changing about who we are and what we are and what we're doing. And second, I think that the attitude of queer people and of our straight and cisgendered allies has changed drastically, because instead of having 20 people arrested with us that day, we had 200 arrested with us that day, which means that people's attitudes when that decision came through was not to go home and complain about it over the internet. It was to get in the streets and fight back instantly. There was no break in that. There was no pause in that. Our reaction was instant, and it was widespread and massive, and it got national attention. And so in organizing, we definitely had to do a lot of convincing to get people to participate with us. And the most common argument that I heard against civil disobedience was that it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't change anybody's minds. It wasn't going to change the minds of anyone on the Supreme Court. It wasn't going to change the minds of the bigots. And, and that's true. It probably didn't change those people's minds, but it changed how I felt about myself as a queer person. I bet it changed the lives of the folks who participated that day. I think it changed the lives of my friends in West Virginia, who saw our action on the internet and instantly called me, and my friends in Utah. It gave those people hope. And we all know the famous Harvey Milk quote, "You have to give them hope." And if we can give hope to our community, if we can prevent our community from committing suicide at the age of 10, like young gay boys seem to be prone to do these days because they're being bullied at school, then we can win this. And the other argument that we got, that One Struggle, One Fight definitely got, was that civil disobedience was risky, it was dangerous, that good behavior was to be rewarded. That doesn't happen. We've been too polite for too long. We can't be afraid to step on toes anymore. We can't be afraid to ruffle feathers. We have to get in people's faces. And really good behavior means staying in the closet, and I don't think anyone here is willing to do that. So anyway, I just want to wrap up. Thank you all for listening to me. Thank you to those of you who participated in civil disobedience with us. I hope you all come to the next One Struggle, One Fight meeting, or sign up on our email list at onestruggleonefight.com. And thank you so much for being here.
so amazing. I'm going to do this to David all the time. No, I really appreciate David filling in. Kip Williams really wanted to be here tonight, but as you can hear in my voice, I'm sick, and I think he has the same thing. Since we've been on the street for 8 months straight, that kind of, gets you whatever. Anyways, our next speaker is Lonnie from Seattle.
Yeah, I'm supposed to talk about our experiences up in Seattle, but I just wanted to mention that, Prop 8 is hits really close home to me because I'm originally from Bakersfield, California, and if you know, it's about 100 miles south of Fresno. My first gay pride event, we didn't have marches back then, but the event was about 12 middle-aged people outside the Liberty Bell. I think I was the only one under 30, and about 3 or 4 of us had paper bags on our heads because we were afraid of being fired. But I am happy to report that on D-Day this year, they had actually dozens of people rallying at 3 different locations against Prop 8. So, as I've been told, they're radicalizing. I moved to Seattle in 2003, and when I saw the movement picking up around marriage equality, picking up back then, I started going to rallies and protests, and strangely enough, every rally and protest I went to, I saw the ISO. And I kind of figured, these people keep showing up to everything that I'm interested in. I want to fight around. So I said, this is, I guess, the organization that I need to be involved with. Of course, everyone was disappointed when November 4th came around and this historic election and Obama was elected, and all of a sudden, oh wait, we're back in the closet again. We saw Prop 8 go through. Seattle responded. There was a 21-year-old gay Mormon who'd never been an activist before, who pretty much organized this thing on his own. The protest against it on November 15th. Over the course of the next few days, he got some support from the big group in town. They were expecting a few hundred people to show up, and actually 10,000 people showed up. So. But the weakness coming out of that awesome event was that the only message to people was, give us some money. We'll see you in 5 months for Lobby Day. So coming out of that, there's good news. Coming out of that, a couple, young queers kind of got more interested in, they wanted to take the movement in a more political direction, or a political direction. and so, a couple of us got to talking, and we decided to form the Queer Ally Coalition. We specifically organized ourselves as an open, democratic, grassroots organization that invited everyone who had anything to say, or anybody who just wanted to listen, to come in and actually build a movement from the ground up. We have liberals, progressives, socialists, anarchists. I don't think we have any Republicans, but we have, one of the amazing things about the movement right now is that there are a lot of stray people that are not just showing solidarity, but leading and marching with us and getting arrested with us. And we've actively made an effort to include every face in our community. We got tired of seeing the same old faces over and over at every rally, boring us with their monotones. And so, we've brought, young women who are, new people to organizing. People who have never been to protests are now leading protests. Our first event was the January 10th, the anti-DOMA protests that all over the country. And just some of the excitement and hope that was still, carrying on at that point. The guy brought a huge sign with Obama with a milk quote, "You gotta give them hope." People were clearly not ready to go back in, not necessarily their closets, but not off the streets. And so we had that march and it was awesome. Unfortunately, there was a rash of gay bashings in the neighborhood, specifically over a couple-month period. And so we said, well, why not have a vigil and a march through the community to show people that, we're going to stand up to bigots. This is our community. This is our street. This is our neighborhood. Strangely enough, as we marched past the Egyptian theater, the movie Milk was showing. And actually, as we got in front of the theater, the doors opened up and these people came out and saw a real-life gay march. And so following chants of out of the theater into the streets, we added a few hundred people. And one of the points that we wanted to make with this organization is that we didn't want to just, keep in our own little closet. We went, on May Day, we marched as an open LGBT and supporters contingent in the May Day parade, distributing flyers explaining why LGBT people should support immigrant rights and why they're connected. And of course, Prop 8 Day D-Day came down. We pushed the hell out of that. Get out in the streets, no matter what the decision was. We ended up with about 1,500 people in downtown Seattle, 5:30 in the afternoon. People driving from Bellingham, a couple hours away, all over the place to get there. Unfortunately, again, it wasn't us organizing it. It was the same old speakers with the same old monotone voices. Actually, our state senator reminded us, we've been disappointed before, we were disappointed now, and we will be disappointed in the future. And that wasn't exactly what the crowd was interested in hearing. So we opened up, luckily we had a megaphone of our own. And so when they ended the program after 25 minutes, people were still just getting there, and they were ready to shut it down. One of our members is a decorated Iraq war veteran, and they refused to allow him to speak because he might rabble-rouse. So we said, thank you very much, and we took over the rally. We opened up the megaphone, and people just came up and they vented. They were disappointed, but they were also pissed off, and they were also ready to do something about it. We staged an impromptu march through the streets of downtown Seattle. If you know anything about the Seattle Police Department, they're not very friendly to anybody who... They came up to us to ask, so which way do you guys want to go? A few weeks ago, the Westboro Baptist Church, the Phelps gang, blessed our green city with their presence and their craziness. Now, the big organizations don't draw any attention to these people. Ignore them. They just want attention. So we said, fuck that. Actually, just to give you a sense of what's going on, a 19-year-old who just came out of the closet in December got in touch with us to help organize a protest against them. They told us to ignore it. We had a few hundred people show up to one location on Sunday. We marched from one location to the next location. We followed them. It's beautiful to see, they protested outside of a church, and it's beautiful to see junior high school choir girls flipping the bigots off. They told us not to protest. When the church the next day came to the local high school that's just down the street from where we live and work, 500 high school students, their parents, and teachers protested against them. And I'm happy to report that the Westboro Baptist Church got no donations. They got no new members. Nobody even paid attention to them because we were the story. Now, right now, we've kind of got a little Prop 8 redux going on in Washington. The strategy for winning marriage equality in Washington over the last few years has been the staged approach. A few rights here, a few rights next year, and then just this past legislative session, they did everything but marriage. They can't call it marriage because we have a DOMA in our state. But they did everything but marriage, everything but the name. It's interesting that they've been fighting for everything but marriage. And so the right wing is trying to take that victory back. They're having some kind of referendum where if they get enough signatures, it'll go on the ballot. And unfortunately, the big rich organizations are pretty much duplicating the failed strategy from here in California. So we're coming up with a plan to actually do a fight back. We're still developing that. They have a couple weeks to actually get enough signatures to put it on the ballot. And so we're organizing a response to that. Seattle Gay News is one of the oldest gay newspapers in the country, and at first they were a little iffy about us, you know, you young kids. Let the older people do it. Now now the editor is coming to our meetings saying, damn, this is awesome. We want to put together a community forum. You want free advertising? We're putting this together. So we're going to put together a community forum to let people who are not professional activists have a say in the direction of the movement. To wrap up, we have a lot of work cut out for us in the next few months and years, and as long as it takes. I've been a gay activist for about over 15 years, and right now I've never been more excited and more proud to be a part of the movement. It's amazing.
Our street, whose street? 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 Our street. Woo! Our street.
You guys are awesome. Thanks so much. And thanks for the standing ovations for these folks, because they have been doing amazing work that we've all been involved in too. And it's just oftentimes activists on the ground who aren't necessarily written up in books and stuff like that in the future, like these are those folks. So, yeah. But speaking of books, next we have Sherry Wolf, and I'm so excited. So yeah, give it up. Sherry's going to speak for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have time for discussion. So be thinking about questions and things you want to say during the discussion. So welcome, Sherry Wolf.
If you had told me exactly 8 months ago today, November 3rd, that as a result of a ballot initiative reversing equal marriage rights in the state of California, an explosion of LGBT activism would literally roll across this country, I would have said, I fucking hope so. Let's take stock of the moment, because sometimes when you're living through it, it's a little difficult to read what is happening around you. And I have a little bit of experience and perspective on this. And I guess in my opinion, I think that what we are going through right now is not merely another stage in the struggle, but actually the single greatest advance of LGBT civil rights since Stonewall. And this is why I think 20 years ago, people are well aware that 20 years ago, there was another explosion of activism essentially around the beginnings, or I should say 7 years, into the AIDS crisis, of course, that continues. But that movement, which was militant, it was in your face, it was massive, and all the rest of it, was largely middle class and white in its composition and its orientation, was very much sunk in to the Democratic Party, had fiercely held on to ideas of separatism towards people who are not gay or lesbian, had, frankly, a lot of funky ideas about bisexuals and transgender people, who are not often included, and often, as a matter of fact, the Lesbian Avengers did not allow bisexual people onto the buses to the March on Washington in 1993. Transgender people who were female to male were not allowed on the Dyke marches early on. Those are facts. In fact, it was openly hostile to the organized left. I can remember actually the first Dyke March I attended in New York, down Fifth Avenue. I believe it was 1990, 91. I was actually sucker punched in the gut to the ground on Fifth Avenue for selling Socialist Worker. And that was not some sort of aberrational activity. It was probably one of the most hostile political environments organizing amidst people who you would think would be great allies, other lesbians and gays fighting for health care and access to AIDS drugs, and experimental. Today, what we have is a multiracial movement, a movement that is consciously anti-corporate, that is quite suspicious of the Democratic Party, to say the least, is developing what I think is a very healthy critique and sometimes hostility to the corporate-driven organizations that have taken tens of millions of our dollars every year and sunk them into the coffers of the Democratic Party and not mobilized anyone since 1993. And actually embraces and is often quite friendly to the organized left. This is a sea change. It is pro-labor, which is a stark shift from the movement of 20 years ago. And then, of course, the embracing of straight people, the open acknowledgement that we need all of us together in this fight, that we are all, frankly, sexually repressed in this society, and we all need a change. You know, I don't know if the brothers and sisters in One Struggle, One Fight know this, but the name of your group, which of course is taken from the chant that people were using earlier, gay, straight, black, white, one struggle, one fight, actually originated from that earlier era 20 years ago. In fact, it was a chant that was raised by the ISO in New York during the AIDS protest. It was a reviled chant by the overwhelming majority of the people who organized for AIDS drugs, who counter-chanted, we're queer, we're here, get used to it. Both a sort of chant of defiance against the system, but also a sort of straight people back the fuck up. At a time when there was greater levels of hostility, when the poll numbers were not what they were, but also not trying to embrace people who were shifting and who might be open to joining our struggle. I am thrilled to know that the militant organization here in San Francisco is called One Struggle, One Fight, and we have a small, modest piece to play in that history as the ISO. Something about, it is of course also worth mentioning the poll numbers, which are just startling and wonderful. The Harris poll now saying that 70% of the population has a friend, a coworker, or a family member who is openly gay, most of whom have said that that has shifted their opinions dramatically. 89% of the population for ending discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in the workplace. Newsweek has just come out with a poll showing even higher numbers than the Harris poll. And frankly, I used to work in advertising. My old ex from the advertising company in New York, the most useless profession in the history of the world. And there was a saying in advertising, will it play in Peoria? Peoria, Illinois, for those of you who don't know, is sort of the anti-San Francisco. It's sort of supposed to be the sort of template for every town USA, the place where people who are transgender would certainly not, think to walk the streets, where outre is really out, where it is supposed to be the quintessence of normative. Well, even in Peoria, this movement has reached. In fact, when some bigoted bar owner put up a sign after he noticed that gay people were starting to hang out in his bar, it said, "This is not a gay bar," dozens of people from Peoria said, "Fuck you, we're coming in, we're integrating this bar." So we can solidly say that LGBT people, once considered an offensive minority, is now a group on the offensive. I want to talk about three dangers in the current struggle, because we should talk openly amongst ourselves about what we're facing, because we are up against some opposition. And the first of them I want to talk about is the notion of inevitability. The feeling that now is one state after another, my God, even Iowa, which surprised us now twice this year, right? Wasn't the lily white state that first gave Obama his vote and gave people an idea that perhaps white working class people in this country would vote for a black man for president? And then, of course, passed marriage equality, ensuring in the minds of every Californian that Jesus Christ, if Iowa can do it, we certainly can. But the notion of inevitability, I think, is something that we need to deal with, because there's a great deal of excitement, and there's a sense that, well, we have the wind in our sails. It is inevitable now. This will happen whatever we do. We've done our protests. We've said our piece. The poll numbers are with us. My God, Dick Cheney has come out of his bunker. Even he has said he is for marriage equality. and that idiot who was advising McCain has come out, the Republican consultant. This is not because somehow they have had some massive change of heart. It is because of what we are doing. And without the self-organized, self-conscious intervention of people in this fight, there is nothing at all inevitable about it. Let's remember, in California, only 2 months before the vote, in November, the poll numbers were actually on our side. And it was the other side that used street heat, that had a strategy with less money, I might add, and that took seriously going into the Latino and black neighborhoods, into the churches, talking to people, making arguments, and they won and we lost. There is nothing inevitable about this fight. Take a look at the employment, the EFCA. I'm sorry? No, the card check sign. My brain is lost. What does it stand for? Yeah, I know. So give me the Employee Free Choice Act. Sorry. That would make it. I'm gonna light my eyes. I can't see anything. Employee Free Choice, which would make it easier for people to join unions by simply signing on a card. A majority signs on, you're in a union. Not the kind of crap that takes years and struggle to get to. It was thought before the election that it was inevitable that this was going to happen. I mean, after all, the trade unions poured $350 million into this campaign. And where is that fight now? There is no struggle to make that a reality. Nothing is inevitable without a struggle. I want to talk about an interrelated issue, because this one is a big one. Just wait. Tone it down. Your time will come. We've got a crisis on our hands now, right? We're in a ditch. This is the worst depression since the 1930s. This state knows better than all. I mean, now you have people basically working without pay. I think that's called, what, indentured servitude? They call it furlough. This is a new vocabulary word, furlough, where you supposedly get time off and don't get paid, but then, of course, you're so fearful that you're going to lose your job that you damn well show up at work and you still don't get paid. And now I hear they're handing out in this state IOUs. I don't know if you can hand your landlord an IOU. I'm fairly certain you can't. But we're being told, tone it down, your time will come. We're dealing with real issues here, real crises. And, we've got nearly 10% unemployment among the general population. We're at 15% unemployment among the black population, and far higher in many cities, which is in excess of 40 and 50% among black men in cities like Milwaukee, et cetera. That is what we are being told by the White House and even by many of the movement so-called leaders. And I think, I came across something in socialistworker.org, and it was some words by a man I consider quite wise, and I'll read them to you. It's Howard Zinn, author of A People's History of the United States, and he's a very savvy fellow, and I think he had some useful words to say. He said, Obama has a lot of wonderful qualities, and he seems to be a decent man, but he's a politician. And worse, he's surrounded by politicians. And some of them he picked himself. He picked Hillary Clinton, he picked Lawrence Summers, he picked people who showed no sign of breaking from the past. We are citizens. We must not put ourselves in the position of looking at the world from their eyes and say, well, we have to compromise, we have to do this for political reasons. We have to speak our minds. This is the position that the abolitionists were in before the Civil War, and people said, well, you have to look at it from Lincoln's point of view. Lincoln didn't believe that his first priority was abolishing slavery. But the anti-slavery movement did, and the abolitionists said, we're not going to put ourselves in Lincoln's position. We are going to express our own position, and we are going to express it so powerfully that Lincoln will have to listen to us. And the anti-slavery movement grew large enough and powerful enough that Lincoln had to listen. That's how we got the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. That's been the story of this country. Where progress has been made, wherever any kind of injustice has been overturned, it's been because people acted as citizens and not as politicians. They didn't just moan. They worked, they acted, they organized, they rioted if necessary. The other thing we are told, in addition to wait, is tone it down. Tone it down. Don't go for the whole deal. In the state where I live in Chicago, There's actually a gay representative, nice man, met him, Greg Harris, lovely fellow. He wants to push for civil unions, a sort of marriage apartheid. He says, well, that's what Vermont did 9 years ago, and therefore that will be the route that we will go. And it's not just that they push for this marriage apartheid, back of the bus, or I guess middle of the bus compromise, but they call it, if you've ever actually, I don't usually read legislation, I'm a socialist, like, oh, it's open, whatever. But I did look at the legislation. What does it actually say? And the thing is called the Religious Freedom and yada, 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 and something about civil unions. I was like, religious freedom? And then you read the thing, and it's all about how preachers and ministers and priests shouldn't be forced against their will to marry people. It's like, they don't need a law for this. Never in the history of this country has anybody been forced to officiate at a wedding if they didn't want to. Why are they writing this into legislation? And to show you how removed from reality some of these people are, they added to it that even, like caterers should not be forced to work at gay, and like, caterers? Is there anywhere in this country where there are caterers who will not work at a gay wedding? Are there straight caterers? So, I'm not so much for the tone it down. I think what the comrades here on the panel have said is really right. This is a working class demand. This isn't a little side issue. We're not asking for some sort of symbolic nod of agreement, although frankly it would be nice to be treated as equal citizens and have coverage under the law. But frankly, there are real material benefits at stake in this struggle that are often dismissed or ignored or just simply not understood. And the fact is, working class people, it may be very nice if you're a professor and you have full health care, and so does your partner, so you don't think about these things. But for the rest of us, actually, health care, death benefits, and all the rest of that are actually things that we give a damn about. This is not some sort of symbolic demand. This is very real. And the last time, it was interesting to me that Obama, at the White House last week when he was brought in a number of the gay sort of corporate-driven organizations to stand around him, and as he signed a fairly sort of, let's face it, it was a sucky piece of legislation for people who were federal employees. What people were really waiting for was to get health care benefits, and even though he talked about getting rid of DOMA, he didn't. And he acknowledged something. I thought he's a brilliant man, actually. He acknowledged King's statement without actually doing anything about it. He acknowledged Martin Luther King's Why We Can't Wait, and then basically said, but you've got to wait. And I went back and read Why We Can't Wait, because it's a very interesting short book. It was written by Martin Luther King in 1963, and he's writing about the explosion of black rage in hundreds of cities across this country under, of course, what was the JFK administration, who waited. In fact, JFK, of course, only had less than one term. He was assassinated on November 22nd of 1963, and 2 years into his administration, he passed housing anti-discrimination legislation, but it was incomplete, it was not sweeping enough, and blacks still protested and were outraged at how tepid his reforms were. And King writes that blacks felt that they were being tossed the same old bone as in the past, only now on a platter and with courtesy. Seems familiar. He wrote in Why We Can't Wait, he says, blacks didn't suddenly become impatient, and I'll quote him here, the posture of silent waiting was forced upon blacks, he writes, because blacks were shackled physically. Now let's face it, nothing like slavery has happened to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people who are not African American in this country. Although, of course, there are at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who are. Though we have, of course, and have to this day, lynchings, though not nearly on the level and the breadth that they took place in this country historically against blacks. But the shackles of the closet that were imposed on most of us by law, keep in mind that the Supreme Court only overturned sodomy laws in 2003. 2003, 21st century, right? And the shackles imposed on us by social custom have been shed, slowly at first, but now we are out in 99% of American counties, according to the U.S. Census of 2000. And right now, it's not that we have suddenly become impatient, but it has now become unendurable to continue to not be covered as equal citizens under the law in this country. And for those who rankle a little bit about equating the fight for LGBT equality with black civil rights, I think it's worth taking a look at what Julian Bond had to say. Because he is, of course, a long-term black civil rights activist. He used to head up the NAACP. And what he said about it to blacks, I think, is very interesting. He said, we should be proud. We should be proud that our brothers and sisters who are not black want to use our movement as a model. Because you know why? It won. I want to address another danger. And it comes actually from people who are not to the right, but actually people who are our brothers and sisters on the left. There are many, many people who are very, what do you want to do? There are many people, he's making motions. There are many people in our movement, great allies, people we have fought alongside of for years sometimes around all sorts of struggles. And Zakiya mentioned it before, who basically say, this is not our struggle. They're either indifferent or, frankly, many of them hostile to the demand for equal marriage rights. And as Zakiya pointed out, the argument essentially goes something like this. Who the hell wants this crappy heteronormative institution that imposes monogamy on us, brings the state into our relationships, and religion? Now, we socialists are sympathetic to all critiques of monogamy, religion, and the state. After all, we are for smashing the state and ending the imposition of the traditional family on people. And of course, we are for single-payer universal health care in our lifetimes as soon as possible. But this movement is not for the state or monogamy or religion. This is a movement for equality. It is a fight for a reform. And I think in many ways it's a reflection of how deeply far away from ordinary working class lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender lives the movement went for a time. It disappeared into the far reaches of the academy where people theorized in abstraction and left people's real life concerns and real life needs by the wayside. And I think if you're going to sort of diss this reform, at least be consistent. Then you have to come out against immigrants' demand for amnesty. Who the hell wants a crappy low-wage job in our shitty empire? I think you have to be consistent. You have to say to the Republic Windows and Doors factory workers, who for the first time in some 70-plus years in this country staged a factory occupation in the city of Chicago, 250-plus of them, they didn't demand revolution. What was their factory occupation about? It wasn't even to keep the factory open. It was to get severance pay as they were being fired, as the factory was closing. Be consistent. Say, we're not for that demand because that's a crappy, silly, halfway demand. I think we have to say, hey, troops out now from Afghanistan and Iraq. You want to call that a crappy demand? Shit, we've got bases in hundreds of countries. Is that a demand that says we don't care about the bases in all the other countries? No. Reforms by their very nature under this system are partial. And they create the conditions in which people unite, they come together, and frankly, you know what? I know we've mostly experienced defeats in our lifetime, but victory also can have a domino effect. And you begin to win on something, you begin to get a taste, a flavor in your mouth for something better. And you begin to feel that you can fight for more. Another part of this argument is that it is narrowing our agenda. And frankly, I just think even what has been set up here speaks volumes about how that is just simply untrue. It has actually broadened the horizons of our movement and of the American society overall, I'm happy to say, about the struggles of LGBT people. We now have more people demanding an end to this noxious abstinence-only education in our schools, which is leading to a 49% rate of new HIV infection among young black men. It is a death sentence for young black men to have abstinence only, period. And people are now fighting around it and agitating around it. It has now given us a taste for an all-inclusive, which means transgender, people-inclusive Employment Non-Discrimination Act, because it is simply outrageous that in 30 states in this country, it is legal not to be hired or to be fired for being gay or lesbian or bi, and in 43 states, perfectly legal not to be hired or to be fired for being transgender. or being suspected of not being fruitful enough for a girl or masculine enough for a man. Fuck that shit. We are now fighting for more. Without this movement for marriage equality, I do not believe we would have seen a historic breakthrough on, of all places, drive time radio in the city of Sacramento just a couple of weeks ago. When those nimrods, morons, idiots got up there on May 28th or whatever it was and called for the beating of young transgender boys, as David said, in the same year when two young men have hanged themselves, young men, boys, 10 years old, 11 years old, hanged themselves because they were called faggot or not boy enough. The response in this country was tremendous. Tens of thousands of people called in, wrote, sent emails. They even got 10 multi-billion-dollar corporations, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, McDonald's, not great bastions of radicalism, to pull their funding from this noxious radio station, shut them off the air, and when they did come back a week later, for the first time, I'm sure, in American history, on drive time radio with these moronic shock jocks, had 2.5 hours of transgender people talking about their issues. Would not have happened without this movement. And if you think we've heard hostility to marriage equality, I am sure that hostility or that indifference carries over in some circles to the issue of don't ask, don't tell. Because, let's face it, people say, you know, this damn empire, that army that murders people across the globe, that has destroyed people's lives from one end of the planet to the other, that is a means through which the U.S. empire imposes its will everywhere. Why would we want gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people serving in it? We don't. We don't want anybody serving in it. But it happens to be the largest workforce in the United States. 3 million people are in there, and tens of thousands of them that we know of are LGBT. And it is not a matter of indifference to us whether or not the largest workforce in this country, run by the federal government, has institutionalized segregation, oppression, and lynchings of gay people. And when Obama does lift this noxious don't ask, don't tell, and I have a feeling he will, because that's one reform they really want. They don't care. Queer boots on the ground are just fine for them. And it basically says to the country that gay people can kill and be killed for the empire. Then frankly, we should use it to kick the door open and say, if we're good enough to kill for you, we want to get equal rights at work. We want it all. It's called the law of unintended consequences. So I just want to take the last couple of minutes to say where we go from here. Because obviously we are fighting in an era in which, hello, there's hope. Despite this crappy economy, despite all of this, I think the inspiration and the hope that people feel is very real. It's wonderful. It's inspiring. And of course, as I said before, people without hope don't fight. They're paralyzed. And we as socialists are hope mongers. And I think that we have to get our heads around this country. I heard somewhere, somebody was telling me, I think Dave Zirin was telling me that Naomi Klein has this great quote about Obama, that with Obama, the best thing about him is also the worst thing, because he's so malleable. And the problem is that right now, the only people trying to shape his policies are the people at the top of society with these sort of no banker left behind policies. But we have to understand. We have to understand what this contradictory situation opens up for us. Because at the same time, as he says one thing, he also says the other. What happened on June 1st is not a point of indifference to us. Here is what the President of the United States, the wealthiest and most powerful empire in the history of the world, had to say. 40 years ago, patrons and supporters of the Stonewall Inn in New York City resisted police harassment that had become all too common for members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. Can you imagine the President of the United States used the word transgender? Out of this resistance, the LGBT rights movement in America was born. During LGBT Pride Month, we commemorate the events of June 1969 and commit to achieving equal justice under the law for LGBT Americans. That was his declaration on June 1 to make June LGBT month. and not 10 days later, his own Justice Department equated marriage equality with incest and all sorts of other things. Outrageous, outrageous. But the gap, the groaning gap that exists between the statement for LGBT Pride Month and a friend of the court brief that basically keeps in place DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, in that gap, that is something we can drive a movement through. And that is what we must do. I know a lot of people are very impatient. I'm impatient too. I don't actually get more patient as I get older. I think I get more impatient. But I'll just say this. I think that, when I was 20, I was a socialist, and I thought for sure by the time I was 30, maybe 35, the state would be teetering. 30 came, it went. 35 did too. So did 40. Not yet 45. But you cannot say that nothing has changed. You cannot say that this is not a magical moment, that of all the shit that is coming down in this country right now, this movement, who would have thought, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, civil rights movement has given hope to immigrant rights activists, to labor activists, to all sorts of people that you can fight and you can win and you can pressure these bigots. We can make change. We need to keep with it. We need to stick to it. We understand it's a long-term struggle, but there are moments in that struggle. There are moments in that struggle that are a little bit different. We cannot say, oh, hey, I gave the best semesters of my college career to the struggle and it didn't pan out. This is going to be long-term, but there are moments like now when history can take a catapulting leap forward and we can push through the door and win full civil equality for ourselves in this country. It's not like the oppression will end. Blacks have had civil equality in this country for some decades, and we cannot say in any score that racism is over. But imagine what it will be like when we force the hand of the President of the United States to get up there finally, sign an executive order, and add LGBT people to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and end this bullshit once and for all. We need to get out there at the March on Washington in October, bring our demands to the seat of power, and make this happen.